flower stalk will produce copious amounts of teeny, dusty, seeds that look like dark brown dust. And what they need to germinate and grow is damp mud. So up there in the back, you can see that exposed mud. That's where the seeds want to land. And cardinal flowers are short-lived perennial. So a lot of people fail with this in their garden, and it's, again, usually that they're over-mulching. If you bury it under mulch or you don't let it seed in, it won't persist in your garden. It does need constant moisture. It's not a drought-tolerant species. But it's very easy to grow from seed. And a lot of what's in the nursery trade are not the wild form. I'll explain that in a minute when I talk about the nurseries more. Blue Vervain, another beautiful native wet meadow species that makes a nice garden plant. It's butterfly and bee pollinated. The flowers are usually anywhere, the flowering stalks are about 4 to 5 feet tall. Blooms at the same time as that swamp milkweed. They look really beautiful together in a garden. And so this is blooming in August, but the seeds don't ripen until late October, which is why you need to wait till November before you mow your meadow, or even wait till the spring, or just mow half of it one year and the other half the next year. Mid-season mowing is one of the ways we're really wiping out our native plants. Now this is one of the easiest native plants to grow from seed, black-eyed coneflower. This is not the species that you common see in garden centers. That's a cultivar of one of the prairie coneflowers. It's usually got a cultivar named Goldstrom. It was actually bred in Germany. But this is Rudbeckia hirta, the black-eyed coneflower, and blooms in dry. It loves dry, lean soil. So it's a great plant for scraggly meadows, roadsides, anywhere where there's not a lot of fertility. Can handle maybe half shade. And it's everyone always wants to know what's the fastest growing wildflower. Well, this one wins the award. You can sow these seeds in the spring, as late as May, and you will have flowers in midsummer. So if you're impatient, I suggest you start with this one. The seeds ripen in September, October, and they're little teeny wisps of a seed that just want to land on the soil surface where they'll germinate. And then the asters. Our asters are some of the top plants for butterfly and moth host plants, and really important late season nectar for all the pollinating insects. This is New England Aster. And it ranges in color from pink to light to dark purple. Very easy to grow from seed. Most of what's in the garden centers are all selections that have been highly bred. And there's been some really interesting research from Annie White from the University of Vermont on comparing the nectar and pollen in cultivars versus in the wild type, and the cultivars for many situations don't compare. The new issue of our magazine is going to have an article by her on that. So, and these seeds, this is blooming in October, so these seeds aren't ripe until mid-November. So you can see, I'm trying to emphasize, the mowing during the growing season is really what's setting back our native plants in open areas. Okay, now I'm going to show a little more what's going on in the nursery trade with native plants and why I want you, working towards seed propagation. So this is purple coneflower. This is, anyone's had an herb or perennial garden for decades. This has, been known amongst those growers. And then in the 90s, it won the Perennial Plant of the Year award from the National Perennial Plant Association. And so the wild type, this is what it looks like. It's got anywhere from pale to deep pink flowers, petals, they hang down. The cone in the center is kind of a dark coppery orange. It's a butterfly and bee magnet, and then later in the season, birds love the seeds. It ranges in height from 2 to 4 feet tall. If you go to a nursery now, since it won that Perennial Plant Award, there are all these different forms that have appeared. So purple coneflower, it's not a Maine wildflower. It's a prairie wildflower that ranges into sort of the mid-Atlantic, like western Pennsylvania range. But it's a very hardy plant. But there's about a dozen purple coneflower species from the Midwest. And so they've all been hybridized. So a hybrid is when you mix two different species together. And you know how with a mule is a hybrid between a donkey and a horse, and it's sexually dysfunctional. You often, when things hybridize, especially animals, they can't reproduce, and that's also true for a lot of plants. So a lot of these new forms, they don't have nectar, they don't have pollen. Some of them are even double-flowered forms. So what happens with a double flower is the stamens and the pistils, that yellow part that's in the center, which are the sex organs, they mutate and they look like petals. So gardeners like it because there's lots of petals and they seem to bloom and bloom because, again, there's no nectar or pollen, there's no bees coming to it, and then they don't produce seed. So this one in the middle here is a partially doubled form. And then there are all these different other cultivars. These are all now, patented plants. They're being cloned and mass-produced at a nursery in Texas. When I don't know if everyone's ever seen it, how cloning is done with plants, but it's done in a laboratory. They pick, some cells from the tip of the stem. They culture them in a petri dish, and then eventually they will reproduce. And then you can prick those out and eventually grow them on in a greenhouse. And a lot of nasty chemicals and hormones are used. And in these big greenhouses where there are hundreds of thousands of plants, that's where the neonicotinoid insecticides are used, and the growers love them because they go into the tissue of the plant, so nothing will eat it. So this is what we do not want to have happen with our native plants. In fact, if you've bought any of these, and I'm not saying they're not pretty. It's not an argument about what's pretty or not. It's that how are we changing plants so that our local plants, which we need to support our local ecosystem, if we start doing this to them, they lose their relationships with all the other creatures in our region, and they won't do that. These plants aren't even hardy. They're really like an annual. So that's what we don't want to happen with our native plants. Here's another great native shrub. This is the bush yellow honeysuckle. It's a shrub anywhere from 1 to 3 feet tall, and it blooms for a couple months in the summer, and the flowers are yellow and they're pollinated by bumblebees. After they've been pollinated, they turn red, so you can tell when you're looking at it which one's been pollinated. If you look on the leaves, see that little purple edge on the leaves? In the spring, a lot of our native plants, when they first leaf out, especially the trees and shrubs, have a purple or reddish cast to them. And that chemical is to deter herbivores right when they leaf out. Because remember, these woody plants, they've been dormant all season. They're desperate to photosynthesize. So they don't want to get eaten in the first week that they've gotten the chance to photosynthesize. So they produce this red chemical, and then it goes away. And so I actually called up Doug Tallamy, who's an entomologist whose expertise is on the relationship with the butterflies and moths and native plants. And I said, who needs this plant? And he said there's 5 species of butterfly and moths that have to have, their caterpillars have to live on this plant. And he says they hate the purple. They're like, it tastes terrible. This plant now, you can get at nurseries, but what do you see now? They're starting to make selections. So there's this purple foliaged one. So that butterfly lays her egg on there and it hatches. It won't eat this. It will starve to death. Think if somebody selected a purple foliaged milkweed. All the monarchs would come, lay their eggs, and then they'd hatch and wouldn't be able to eat this. Same thing, with variegated plants. So there's even a variegated form of this. The other thing with these selections is you have to clone them. You have to reproduce them asexually. So the old-fashioned way of doing that was to just dig up and divide a plant or maybe take a stem cutting. But so there's no genetic diversity. So here we have a great native shrub. Wonderful, the nursery trade got interested in it. But right away they started pulling out ones that, somebody thought were superior. And, when there weren't so many people on the planet and there was still a lot of nature, we could get away with this. But that's not true anymore. And so we don't, stick with the straight species. So how do you do that? So I'm really dedicated to demystifying native seed sowing. This is not rocket science. Many of these plants can easily be grown by anybody, anyone from seed. Don't start with the trilliums. Start with the many that have seeds that can be stored dry. And so one of the things that Wild Seed Project does is we collect and sell seeds of locally grown, all wild type native plants. We get seeds from the land of our membership, and we have stock beds of some species, and then we package them. We store them all in glass jars in the refrigerator, package them up in small batches. I have a whole team of volunteers who help with this, and then we sell them through the website. Everyone wants us to put them in all the garden centers, but these are not like your cucumbers, which are highly domesticated and come from a warm climate and are perfectly happy to sit for a couple months in the garden center store. Our seeds, keeping them in the refrigerator. I also teach classes on how to seed collect, but people often say to me, "Oh, I'm so happy you're saving the native seeds." And I'm not trying to get people to save the seeds. I'm trying to get us sowing and planting the seeds. And I don't want you to start seed collecting until you've first sowed the seeds, because you don't want to collect the seeds without knowing how to collect them, because it's easy to kill them if you don't know that they're ones that can't dry out or have to have this treatment or that treatment. So how do you do it? So you don't have to worry, does this one need a month cold? Does this one need a winter? Does this one not need a winter? The easiest way to do it is to sow them outdoors in the late fall or early winter. And you can, and I really suggest just doing it in plastic pots. You could take a cold frame and convert it and fill it with good organic potting soil. You don't need the glass lid. But you can just get 4 or 6 inch pots. So on the right you're looking at milkweed, the middle is aster, and the left is black-eyed coneflower. So you can sow 50 or 100 seeds in a little 4-inch pot. You can do this after Thanksgiving, New Year, into January, February. You can do this in your kitchen. You sow the seeds, then you cover there's so many good organic potting soils available today. Get a good organic potting soil, fill the pot, tamp the soil down, sow the seeds, and then I like to cover the seeds with coarse sand. You can just get it at the hardware store. It's called sort of all-purpose coarse sand. It will say on the bag, used for landscaping or builders. Just make sure it doesn't have de-icing salt in it. And I like to cover it with sand because when people fail with seed sowing, it's usually that 2 things happened. Either they buried the seed too deeply. Lots of seeds need light to germinate. So that's why, when you rototill a garden and suddenly you have a new crop of weeds, it was all those seeds that were deep down in the soil. So cover the seeds with sand. And a good rule of thumb is that you cover the seeds to the thickness of the seed. So if you had a sesame seed, you'd cover it just 1/8 of an inch. If you had an acorn, you'd cover it 1 inch. If you have teeny dust-like seeds, they need light to germinate, and they're designed to germinate on the surface of the soil. So you just cover the thickness for the seed of the sand, push the label down before you carry it outside, all the way down deep, otherwise the squirrel will pull it out. And so you can do this in your kitchen. No matter what the temperature is outside, carry them outside, find a flat, shady place. So you want to identify it before it snows, but you can put the pots down on the snow. And then cover them with wire. And you want to cover them with wire because squirrels and cats, will pull the labels out or walk over it. And doesn't matter, these seeds, rain, snow, sleet. Let's say you did this after Thanksgiving and it was an odd 50-degree day. And then the next day it was 10 degrees. And then we got a foot of snow, and then a thaw, and then it rained, and then it turned to ice, and then we got 2 more feet of snow, and then it was late January and it thawed again. These seeds, that actually helps break the heavy seed coat. You know, these seeds have evolved to need that freeze and thaw to, you know, to know they need to go through that before they will germinate in the spring. In fact, when I got out of college, I apprenticed to Jack Alexander at the Arnold Arboretum in Boston. I went in twice a week and worked with him to learn propagation. And I remember him showing me all the complicated ways they got these different seeds to germinate, because these were species from all over the world that they didn't know, there was no information on how to propagate them. And he'd show me. He had honey locust seeds that had been sitting in a bowl of water since 1912 and had still not absorbed water. Those ones needed fire or boiling water or a big animal to eat. He had seeds that he'd put in and out of the refrigerator. He had seeds that he would file the seed coat. And then he said, you know what works the best is when you just throw them outside. All temperate northern species of seeds have evolved with the winter, and they like that, and they don't need to be protected. People are always like, oh, it's too cold out for them. I'm like, it's not too cold for them. And then they start germinating. This picture is taken in early April. It's amazing how early. There are many species that will germinate when it still dips below freezing at night sometimes. And then that, you know, the raw, cold, rainy weather in April and May, the kind of weather that farmers hate because they can't get out and plant their crops, which are mostly tropical, these seeds love. And when you do it outside, all the banes of indoor seed sowing or greenhouse production, you don't have fungal gnats, you don't have damping off and rot. You know, look how closely these seedlings are together. They are fine with that. So then, this picture is probably now later in May. In fact, yeah, you can see the Norway maple has dropped its aborted seeds in the picture. So these are 4-inch pots. So 9 4-inch pots in 1 square foot can have 9 different species and hundreds of native seedlings germinating. Then what I like to have homeowners do, this is Jack in the Pulpit seedlings. So in that one pot, there's like 30 plants. This is Silky Dogwood. That's 50 plants in an 8-inch pot. So what I like to have people do is, when the seedlings start to fill that pot up, you know, you could divide them up and put them into separate pots. But as a homeowner, it's much easier to just take the whole pot and put it in a much bigger pot. So that little 4-inch pot, you'd put in a big 8-inch pot. This pot, you could put in a really big pot. And then in September, you could go plant a huge hedge of this. And so waiting till September to plant your plants out in the garden, you know, unless you are the most attentive person in the world, if you plant these out in your garden in early June, you know, it's going to get hot, it's going to get dry, there's going to be a lot of competition. You'll probably just end up losing a lot. If you instead keep them, you know, in your door, you know, wherever you set up your little area, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. Those 9 pots, 4-inch pots that were in 1 square foot are now just in a couple square feet, where you can keep your eye on them and water them regularly. And then at the end of the season, you can plant them where you want them to go. This is a really inexpensive way to produce a lot of plants. Yeah?
Why shouldn't they get sun to start with?
Well, because the other way people kill seedlings is that they start to germinate and then they dry out. So when the so remember, some of these seeds are small and they're on the soil surface. If they're in the shade, you'll get really good germination. If the plant is a sun-loving, droughty species like the black-eyed coneflower, then you can move it to the sun. If it's a shady species, just leave it in the shade. But if you wait till it germinates, again, if you're really attentive, but you'll have better germination in the shade, or at least half shade.
The reason I ask is because I just tried this. I bought a 3-pack at on. And I was late in getting them in pots and taking them outside. And when I finally found a place outside, I realized, oh, the sun's going to hit it.
It's not that the sun's going to hurt it, it's just more likely to dry. You know, like I said, it's like they're a little germinating seedling. It's like a baby. You can't just leave it out there and, you know. See, the life of a seed, most seeds, you know, plants produce thousands of seeds over their lifetime, hundreds of thousands, millions. An oak tree, you know, lives a couple hundred years and will produce millions of seeds in its lifetime. And for that oak tree to be reproductively successful, only one of them has to make it to adulthood. Most seeds get eaten or they start to germinate, you know, they're food. So if you make a little nursery, you will have all of them or most of them will succeed versus, you know, everyone always wants to toss their seeds out in the world. And I'm like, our native seeds are too precious. You know, yeah.
When you're putting them out in September, a lot of them have probably died back, right?
No, most of them have. There's some, like columbine goes dormant. Some do, but a lot haven't. But the root's still there.
So you're just digging through your pot? And
Yeah.
the roots
So then you can, you know, tip the pot upside down, separate them out, and like I said, plant them out and water them once, and then you don't have to do anything. Put a label where they were. It's really a much better time of year to establish them. You could overwinter them in the pot, in which case you do have to insulate them. You have to pretend you're snow because they're a plant, not a seed, and do it in the spring. And obviously that's what commercial nurseries do, but you can have a lot of rodent damage with potted plants in the winter. So fall is a really great time to plant. Or early spring, like the second the ground thaws. Then you take advantage of the cool, moist weather, and and they'll get settled in before the heat of summer comes by. So, you know, the seeds are really beautiful, and when you propagate, you will feel like a parent. You'll feel really proud of your little seedlings. You know, some seeds, there's that, believe it or not, there's an eastern native prickly pear cactus. You should see what the seedlings of those look like. They're like little porcupines. You know, it's a really fun process to start growing plants from seed because you will really get to know that plant. And then you'll start noticing even the seedlings in the wild in a way that you will have never seen before. Now, we do always get people saying they want to just toss seeds out in the world. So I say, if you want to do that, make seed balls, or seed bombs they're called. And that's where you mix a little bit of potting soil with clay and make little pea-sized balls, and then just put a little pinch of the seed. And then you can toss them into, you know, an abandoned lot, or, again, you can't, you know, you could try tossing them in a meadow if there were some milkweed seeds, say, or maybe some of the asters. You know, that's a fun community project to do. There's no science behind it. However, it's a practice that's been done for thousands of years in reforestry. So, you know, being that our native seeds aren't out there dispersing in their seeds in the wild, this is a fun project to do. So one of the things, the Wild Seed Project website is filled with articles. They're called blogs because that's what you have to call it now, but it's really just an article. I have some samples up here. I won't tell you about my cat or, you know, what I had for breakfast. So, like, here's one on In the Shade, gardening with natives from the understory. I did one on making native seed bombs. So if you want to do this, it is it'll be fun for the kids, but you do it in the fall or early spring, like now, not May's late. Earth Day, maybe. You could do it with Black-Eyed Susan. But
What you do that if you make a ball with what?
Potting soil and clay.
Okay.
A little bit of clay. You can either go get potter's clay, or sometimes you can get natural kitty litter that's just clay, and just mix it with a little water and you'll make balls. Like I said, you can read the whole recipes on our website. So there's lots of free information on our website. The other thing we do, we have a really beautiful magazine called Wild Seed. It's an annual publication. There's no advertising. It's all the whys and hows of growing native plants. Our new issue just went to the printer today, so that will be out in a couple weeks. You can, we are a membership supported organization, so if you join, the basic membership level is $40. You get a copy of the latest issue of the magazine, and you get a 20% discount on seed. But there is also so much information on our website. And you know, I studied botany in college, and when I look at my old field guide, my Newcomb's field guide, and read, you know, the description, and then it says abundant, common, it's really depressing. You know, our native plants are really losing their place in our world today. And while I want nurseries to start growing these plants from seeds, and there are people doing that, and hopefully more and more of it will happen, but you know, we have a big problem on our hands. And if lots of people started sowing the seeds and not being afraid to do that, it's an inexpensive way to produce a lot of plants. If you don't need them, you can share them with a plant sale or your land trust, or give them away. You know, your friends will like them better than all the zucchinis you've been dumping on them. You know, and it's very nourishing, and it's also amazing how, when you start planting native, how quickly the creatures come back. They really do. You know, even monarch butterflies with your first year seedlings of milkweed with no flower, they will land and lay their eggs on it. They don't care. Just like, you know, all the butterflies and moths that live in an oak tree, they don't care that it's not a 50-year oak tree. They will, you know, live on a 10-year-old or 5-year-old one. You know, juvenile plants are just as important. You know, here we have gotten so used to wanting to buy big plants, but they don't establish nearly as well as when you have juveniles. They will catch up. There was actually a great study done at the Arnold Arboretum in the caliber width of the stem of a transplanted tree. So a 1-inch diameter tree took 1 year to recover from the shock of transplant before it would even start growing again. So a 2 or 3-inch tree is 3 years before it even just recovers from the shock and starts growing again. So, you know, don't be, you know, if you look at all the sugar maple trees planted in our towns in Maine, people in the past planted trees and plants for the future. We all need to be doing that for the next generation. And I hope you guys will all, like I said, it's not the time of year that you need to think about seed sowing. It's the time of year to get out there and learn about this stuff and then plan to do it next fall. Thank you.